So hello and welcome back to Conscious TV, and this time we've got Renata and myself and Tina and Stephen, who we interviewed separately previously. So you're watching this and the back end of the previous interview. We're going to have a general discussion now. I should say first they've written this book about the jhanas, which is very interesting, which is practicing the jhanas, which is available, I'm just being told, not only in English but in Korean and Italian. That's very impressive, isn't it? So,
and German,
and will be in German,
Spanish.
That's right. Yeah.
Spanish
And Spanish. Fantastic. So welcome back, Tina and Stephen, and Renata's got a question to kick us off, I think.
I have a question, yes. So my question is that it seems, and we also experience to some extent, that people are waking up all over the place and have deep, profound experience of the nature of reality without ever having meditated. Now, why meditate? And how do those people can be motivated to meditate?
Mm-hmm.
You know, grace seems to happen, and maybe it has to do with our time. I don't know. Yeah. So how do you see why should we meditate?
Especially since we're non-dual Buddhist teachers who encourage meditation.
Exactly.
It's a good question.
Yeah, and you did a 1 year long solitary retreat, and you meditated 35 years, and I don't know how many years.
It's been since 1976, so it's a long time.
Yeah.
We actually started meditating the same
Well,
year.
you meditated 30 years, didn't you?
Oh no, longer than that.
40 years.
40 years at
Yeah.
least, yeah.
I meditate sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Well, one thing is that some people meditate just because they enjoy it, so that's good to say. But meditation, one can make an argument that all of this is manifesting from the ground, whether we meditate or not. Awakening happens, and it may not be linearly caused. Like, for example, we can't say that if you meditate you will wake up. We can't guarantee that. So meditation isn't a guarantee. That's the first thing, is to say that that is acknowledged pretty much everywhere. And yet at the same time, for people who feel that enlightenment drive for awakening, the odds tend to increase if one does meditate. So if one has already been awakened, there may be other reasons to meditate that we can also talk about, but if one hasn't awakened, meditation is a way of cutting through the veils of the personality to experience what we actually are, and can provide either glimpses or extended experiences of that can lead to awakening. And that's really what meditation has been for at a deeper level. There's also just meditating on a daily basis because it makes your life better. And all of the brain research that's out now, which we can talk about, really shows the health benefits.
I think too with meditation, it's a great process of, sometimes it's talked about as tilling the soil. It helps break up the ground so that if we do get these seeds that can grow into awakening or realization, they've got a place to land and be fertilized. And in addition, I think to me there's something about that when we meditate, we're orienting towards the source, towards the mystery, towards the absolute. And on some level, it feels as though we're offering ourselves in the meditation. So it's kind of a direct contact saying, I'm here and I'm opening to this experience of whatever the absolute wants to bring in.
So we set, and when we start meditating, it sounds like we set an intention.
Sort of
And
unspoken
then
intention.
it takes its own movement, the intention.
Right.
Would you see it that way?
I would say it's a soft intention,
Yeah.
but it's also a recognition of that we are opening to the absolute coming into our lives in whatever way is the wisest.
We're also oriented to the present moment. And so it's a practice of being present, and also meditation allows us to see the patterns that keep that from happening. And so in some ways, a lot of people think that if they go into thinking while they're meditating that I'm not meditating or it doesn't work. But that actually, if we understand the purpose, that shows us the patterns that we're constantly driven by. So even for somebody who's already awakened, meditation can be a way of digesting and reclaiming or really integrating the personality material that keeps us from being in the present moment. So even after awakening, there are some benefits to meditation that may be different than before awakening.
I think absolutely that after awakening, meditation can help us integrate the experience. It can open it more and just make it more accessible. So there's a way that it really does help deepen the awakening and let it land more fully in our consciousness.
For example, with the Dzogchen practice, which is one of the main practices we do ourselves, there's what's called resting in Rigpa, so that one realizes Rigpa, so that's really realizing the primordial awareness that can happen in glimpses or can happen for extended periods. And then as a person tries to live more from this on a more ongoing basis, the practice actually helps us rest in Rigpa so that this becomes more consistent all the time. So that's where 2,500 years of millions of people experimenting with this and trying to stabilize realization, there's some benefit to what's been learned over this 2,500 years.
I heard the Dalai Lama once say, I don't know if I heard it or I read it, probably I read it, that there are some cave yogis who meditate like 25 years, and he said nothing will happen to them unless they follow pointers. They need to like I experienced when I did some Mahamudra meditation, the teacher gives you a pointer and then you start seeing actually where you are in the moment. And then there is the next pointer, and he said, this is important, otherwise consciousness does not move. I don't know, is this your experience, or do you have anything to say to that? I found that fascinating, that there are some cave yogis and they just sit there, and he said nothing comes out of that.
That's a good question. I'll answer it on a personal level. That I felt that when I was in the Zen tradition, I was like a hot air balloon pilot. I could get up into the air, but I never knew with the open awareness where I was going to go or where I was going to land. Where with a meditation like this, the jhana meditation, I feel more like I'm a pilot in a modern aircraft. I've got all the switches and dials, and I know how to adjust them and turn them on.
Yeah.
So it gives a lot of structure in a way that we really can keep going, as you say, in a certain direction. And again, we're still offering and opening ourselves to the mystery, to the absolute. But it gives us more of a kind of technique, and we can stand alone, and then it's less serendipitous.
Right, and having a teacher is really crucial. This is part of, when a lot of the people have come to us, some of them practiced and the teacher wasn't as accessible, or maybe they met with them once on a long retreat. And what we find when we do retreats, we meet every other day with people, and that makes it where they're not wasting a lot of time doing things that are unproductive. And without some guidance, that's easy to happen. So it's a shame that somebody would waste many years doing that, but this is part of the benefit of working with a teacher.
I think it would be useful just to highlight how the meditation you're doing is quite different from Vipassana meditation, because as I understand it, Vipassana meditation, you're not focusing on one object, you're more open, it's about awareness, it's about being present, and if attention goes somewhere, then you allow that to happen without engaging with it. So your attention might go to the body, and you're aware of that. It might go to a sound, it might go to all kinds of things. But with the jhana meditation, what you're doing is you're focusing on a single point, and the point, as you did in the meditation earlier, is the point here. And so whatever happens, you come back to here. Am I explaining that right?
Yeah. There's, within Theravadan Buddhism, there's 3 stages, sila, and then the 2 you described, samatha, which is what we're teaching, the anapanasati, the mindfulness of breathing. And then there's vipassana, which is an open awareness. So like in the brain research they're doing nowadays, there's 4 categories, and those are 2 of them. One is focused attention, one is open awareness. And they're each cultivating different things that are really important for our deepening and our unfoldment.
And you also talk about access concentration and absorption concentration. Do you want to explain the difference between those 2?
Sure. As we get more concentrated, we all start with momentary concentration, every meditation. As we get more concentrated, again, it's that light we talked about earlier, Tita talked about in her interview, that light that narrows some as our mind unifies. Then it gives us the opportunity to go a little bit deeper. And in access concentration, there's also some benefits that arise that we call jhana factors. And these are things like joy and bliss and one-pointedness. And this assists the meditation, so we go deeper still. So the process, all meditation has momentary concentration and access concentration. Only concentration meditation has absorption.
Right,
jhana.
so for example, in Vipassana is a great practice, so we're not saying anything negative about it, but because it's an open awareness and the contents of our awareness are changing, it caps out at the level of access concentration, whereas meditations that are focused attention, one can actually experience jhana. That's a possibility that isn't available with open awareness meditations.
I just wanted, just before you come in, Renata, I just wanted to also read a quote from your book here, which I thought was interesting, or it might have been a quote from Stephen, I'm not sure. Increasing the depth of meditation serves to purify the mind more and more fully. It's like a rock polisher. As the polisher turns the rocks, tap this wrongly, as the polisher turns the rocks, come on contact with each other again and again, knocking the rough edges and debris off one another. So it's like,
Right.
the more you do, the more smooth, I guess you're smoothing your character, your personality.
The pearl.
And you're saying it's the pearl beyond price.
That's how a pearl starts to shine.
Yeah.
It's
Right.
rubbing,
Right.
it's
Yeah.
rubbing in the shell
Yeah.
with the sand, and that's what makes it shine.
Yeah.
Well,
Right.
Ian, it's what we talked about in the interview about what drew me to work with the Diamond Heart work, was the fact that I had this level of contact with the transcendent, but I could tell that I had these rough edges that were bumping people the wrong way, not the way I intended, not the way I felt internally. So that's where these kinds of programs, where things like the jhana practice or things like Diamond Heart, will help us develop into more whole, full people.
Okay.
So after so many years of meditation and being really masters and in meditation and teaching meditation, do you still have your daily practice, and do you feel you're still expanding through meditation, or is there still something happening?
Absolutely, yes. We both have daily practice and think that's very important, and really wouldn't do without it. It's kind of like brushing your teeth, it's in that category for us of something that you do every day because it's good for you. And so for us, that's very important. The expansion of the practice really for us at this point is about living from what realization we have, and how can that be embodied and lived from as much as possible. So this is really for us kind of the growing edge, you might say, of our practice, is really living from the realization that we've had just as a human.
And it's interesting, as you get more refined, as you let your experience land, it opens you up more so that there's more capacity to receive. So it does feel as though there's expansion as there's digestion and as we learn to live from it. So it's a self-reinforcing process.
Right, and there's also personality material that still needs to be digested and worked through and refined, that can be seen also with that clarity. Sometimes it's easier to see that patterning that's where the stuck places are.
So I sometimes hear about research, and you kind of mentioned it in earlier. There's a lot of research done around meditation, and it gets more and more scientific and more and more understood. And there seems to be changes happening in the mind.
Yeah.
But does that actually, these changes also influence us how we live then?
Mm-hmm.
Do you understand what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
What kind of changes are those?
Mm-hmm. Well, the brain research, some of it is just incredible. Like, one of the things that impressed me when I started reading it is that the actual gray matter of the brain changes, and that for meditators, and especially long-term meditators, a 50-year-old meditator's brain will look like a 25-year-old's brain. And so there's clearly benefits that
You
are...
get younger?
No, with any kind of meditation.
You become younger.
Your brain becomes younger.
Your brain
Yeah.
becomes younger.
We haven't found a way to work on the hair and the wrinkles yet, so we'll let
I
you
still
know.
know the meditation which makes the body younger too.
Now that would be a supernormal power, wouldn't it?
Yes, we're still looking for that one.
Well, what's interesting from the brain research, as Tina's saying, is that they're finding with long-term meditators, we actually produce more gray matter. So it isn't
Right.
just that we're taking advantage of it more, we're actually growing new gray matter. So just thinking about that, it's just magnificent.
And it can happen at any age. Age is irrelevant. Whenever someone starts meditating, and they found through like some of the studies of MBSR and others that have been rigorously studied, that it doesn't take that much meditation to start producing health benefits, blood pressure, stress reduction, all kinds of, there's 250 studies or more a year now done on meditation. So it's extremely beneficial just from a practical standpoint. Just like physical exercise, this is exercise for our consciousness. And it's been so proven now through science that it's kind of irrefutable at this point.
Yeah. So
You had lots
then
of other questions.
the next question is, so I know we can have all kinds of realizations through meditation, or waking up, or I don't know if you can get enlightened just through meditation. So how do you see realization? What, we interviewed about 400 people, and it looks like there is such a variety in realizations and awakening, and there's no real scientific paper out yet what enlightenment is, where we can be measured on. You came up with the 51%
Right.
of that's something. Yeah.
Well,
so
what's important to realize is that within the absolute, all realizations are contained there. There's no distinction in the absolute between religion or spiritual practice, meditation or non-meditation, because all of it, the absolute contains all of it. So the understanding that all these realizations are available to each of us really just depends upon our consciousness and we might frame it as our karmic propensity, things like this. So, but there are lots of realizations. So to say that, someone has one, it may not be one that we have as part of the totality of Buddhism, but for Tina and I, it's not a matter of not recognizing that, because it's coming from the source, from the absolute, rather than from a tradition.
So a realization is a glimpse of who we are. Would you say that?
Well, this is where we get, for us, and we really discovered the 51% rule just in our conversations with each other. That was where it came from, even before we were teachers, when we met and talked about our own background and history of people can have glimpses, and for us, we don't consider that awakening. We consider that glimpses, because basically the person still feels like a me that's having glimpses. I mean, it's extremely beneficial, but it hasn't actually changed the person's perception of what they are. So this is where we came up with the 51% rule of people having enough glimpses, so maybe 20% of their conscious is identifies as the ground, and then at some point some experience can happen, maybe a big one that takes them up to 60%, but anytime after the 51%, all of a sudden they experience themselves as being the ground of being, rather than as being the ego self. And at that point there's a shift that is irreversible, that keeps deepening if the person keeps practicing. So for us, that's really how we define awakening, is when that shift of identity happens.
And really, after the 51%, one of the hallmarks is that the person doesn't say that I'm awake. What they realize is that awakeness happened in their consciousness. So it's not an ownership, right? And before then, it's I'm having these realizations. Mm-hmm. There's still an ownership of it. Mm-hmm. So that's part of the shift.
Also, not only in my experience, and probably in your experience, and you mentioned it in your book, it's a visceral experience, awakening. It's like something in the body woke up as well. It's not only a knowingness, it goes so much deeper than the knowingness.
Right. We could even say it happens on the cellular level, that the cells begin to wake up in our body in a way that you're talking about. Yeah. And it may be slow at first, but there is a way that it does sweep through the body, and it ends up activating all these little corners and nooks and crannies in us.
I think this is part of, sometimes there's the blissful sensation, and that to me feels very embodied, that just being a human, there's a lightness, there's a sense of buoyancy, and that's part of the embodiment of the awakening, is really feeling that the body doesn't have the same density as we might have perceived.
Mm-hmm. So you just mentioned human. What is a human? When is a human?
It's a great song by Rag and Bone Man.
What is a complete human, and what is enlightenment? You know, we have the enlightenment drive. How does it look like being? Is there anybody completely enlightened? Is it possible to live in this world being completely?
We've asked if we think there's anyone who's fully enlightened. We've talked about that a lot lately.
We should ask you. You've interviewed 400 spiritual teachers.
You would know better than anybody.
Well, 400 different answers.
We think we're all a work in progress, and that maybe there is a place that one doesn't need to work any longer. But it seems to us at this point there's, again, no end to the depths of the mystery, and there seems to be no end to the depths of the personal material that can come up and we need to work with too.
Yeah, and
the fullness, really, the way we often talk about it is the absolute functioning through the personal, through that uniqueness that we all are, which is really the beauty of the human experience, is that we're all unique and there'll never be anyone like any of us again in history, and there never has been everyone. So there's a unique way that ground that is manifesting everything can only know itself through the human experience. As far as we know, there aren't any other beings that can become enlightened. There might be some that can be self-aware, like dolphins and elephants and so on. But that is really the human experience, is the ground knowing itself, functioning in form. And so this is where the consciousness comes into the human form and loses contact with being the ground through the structuring of the self-reflective awareness. And the ego development is just a stage. It's just that it's not complete. So awakening, in our view, is the fullness of the human experience, where the ground is actually knowing itself, which is all of this and all other beings, as the ground, though, not as the ego self. So that's really, to us, that's really the journey, is the realizing what we really are, and then the working through of the personality material, not that it all has to be gone, but so that it doesn't obscure.
So working through also means disidentifying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right, because when one is, again, this is part of the Dzogchen teachings, but one is abiding in the primordial awareness that's always here for every human. Every human has it. We don't have to do anything to get it. When there's the abiding there, the personality can be active even, but there isn't the identification with it. And that's really where the suffering can often happen, is when the identification is present. So that, to us, that's really the journey of, you asked what does it mean to be human and awakened. That is, we frame it as the transformational and the transcendent. So the transcendent is the part of our experience where we're in touch with our deeper nature. The transformational is the part where the ego self becomes more and more digested, and we're less functioning from the survival instinct, which the body needs to survive, and we're functioning more from the enlightenment drive.
That's something so important what you just said, Tina, because and I know you both emphasized it in your teaching and in the book, that the transformation is sometimes not so interesting. It's more interesting, but when we started with Conscious TV, there was still much more focus on it. That was 10 years ago. Much more focus on the transcendence. You know, there was, for example, Neo-Advaita. Nobody is here, nothing to do, kind of things.
Right.
And some people, you know, loved it and but also went through agony with it, because there was a lot here.
Right.
But that is changing. A lot more people talk now embodiment and being in the world. And I know Ian interviewed George, the guy who is on Ramana Maharshi.
And Michael James.
Michael James. You know, Ramana Maharshi's teaching, where it's all going in. That's the only thing. The world does not exist. It's all a dream.
Right.
And then you ask, what? This incredible beauty, is that just here to distract us from going in?
Right. Well, we can all see this is the shift in consciousness.
Yeah.
Because again, we're moving out of the monasteries and the nunneries into the world.
Yeah.
And how does it work? And this is really a place in history where it seems like we're really, you know, some of the music from the 60s, the age of Aquarius may be upon us, but we're at this point where we have to make the big shift up. And that's part of why, in our opinion, the pendulum is swinging in the other direction, and we see a lot of extremism and fundamentalism in the world, because it's really taking the pendulum back there before it makes that new sweep into a more unified and a more whole world for all of us to live in.
Yeah, we really feel that the transcendent, and this is where we started out, was on transcendent paths, and we had capacity there and were able to do those paths. And we both thought about becoming cave yogis and turning away from the world, but there was something for both of us in not doing that, and so we were headed that direction, and we turned back to the world, because it feels like now the time is to bring this consciousness into form, so that all of materiality can be enlightened in a certain way. And so it's not enough to transcend. We want to actually be in the world as humans. I mean, the human experience has so much beauty and suffering, but it seems like in Buddhism, this is one of the things we don't agree with, that basically you're just born to realize the absolute and then get off the karmic wheel of rebirth as fast as you can. That doesn't make sense to us. The human experience is so much more than that, and so much more beautiful.
And why wouldn't the people who are being realized, why wouldn't they be reborn and coming back into the world and bringing that consciousness, contributing it to the collective, so that everyone is enriched and every being is enriched?
Yeah.
This is part of the Bodhisattva vow, is
That's
that
right.
one will continue to have rebirth until all beings are enlightened. And, you know, that seems like a long-term project, you know, a long-term goal. But when one realizes the unity, you're not coming back for someone else. It's your own as the ground, everything needs to be enlightened for that process to be complete.
And that's one thing with people having awakening experiences. One quality that can happen is they can really have the sense that the collective has awakened in this location. So the whole collective has that, the charge gets sent out in some way. And so everyone, we could say, is elevated by that one individual having that experience.
Yeah, that's compassion.
It is compassion, right?
Yeah. And love.
And love.
Yeah.
Well, that's quite a nice place to finish. Anything else? Burning questions you had?
You two are so cute.
You are.
So thank you very much, Tina and Stephen, for joining us on Conscious TV. And if you've watched all 3 segments and you've watched also the separate interview, then you've done very well. So thank you for watching, and I hope we see you again soon. Goodbye.
Goodbye.